So we need to consider some of the arguments that have been made against bills of rights and show why these arguments are flawed. Well, one argument is you don't need an explicit enumeration because tradition and culture of a people who love liberty would suffice to keep them protected. The problem is tradition and culture are very fickle and ephemeral concepts. They change all the time. They get transformed all the time. If you've ever played a game of telephone, you know how a simple phrase can be distorted when it passes through a variety of minds. And likewise with culture and tradition, it continually evolves and adapts. And that's a good characteristic in many circumstances. However, when we want some kind of principle to be preserved, then it's not enough. Because the demagogues who want to expand government can easily play the tradition card as well. They could say, well, sometime in our past we've regulated this aspect of people's lives, and they would be right. Sometime in our past there was this prejudice and this superstition and we want to revive it. Or they could construe tradition as being other than what it is because people's memories of what it is are a bit hazy. Without a written record, they won't quite remember the freedoms that their ancestors used to enjoy. And so, without some kind of concrete, lasting, unchangeable enumeration of rights, tradition and culture will gradually permit these rights to be eroded. So now we come to Hamilton. Hamilton's Federalist number 84 is perhaps the most systematic document arguing against a Bill of Rights. So, what arguments does he make? And before I launch into them, I must say I think that many of his claims are a bit disingenuous because of the motives behind making them. That is to say, the moment Hamilton got into office under the Washington administration, he was Secretary of the Treasury, he began to argue for a broad construction of the Constitution to permit his program of extensive public improvements, tariffs, the national bank, for instance, to come to pass. And one of Hamilton's claims is, well, the enumerated powers of government are enough to keep the government in check because the government isn't allowed to do anything except that which is enumerated. Except when Hamilton got into office, this is precisely what he was trying to get the government to do. He was trying to get the government to exercise unenumerated powers. So his arguments, I think, are a bit sophistical, but nevertheless I believe that they should be addressed on their own terms. He argues, for instance, that bills of rights might be good and necessary under a monarchy because the king doesn't represent the people. The king could go his own way and start clamping down on them, but not in a representative government because in this government, founded allegedly on the sovereignty of the people, Hamilton writes that the people surrender nothing. And as they retain everything, they have no need of particular reservations. So this argument presumes a kind of perfect popular sovereignty, where every single measure the government passes gets the enthusiastic consent of the people. It's like you're doing this to yourself, so why would you want to protect yourself against it? Well, there are problems with this concept. One, it's completely unrealistic, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with the real world. Russell Hardin, who is a constitutional scholar and an economist, writes, popular control fails in principle for two quite different reasons. First, there are the standard problems of social choice. That popular views will commonly not aggregate into a collective view, and that individuals will be motivated neither to understand public issues well enough to act on them, nor to take action even when they do understand them. So the fact is, information about what is right, what is desirable, is dispersed throughout the economy. And individuals don't understand all of what a government ought to do. They have disagreements with one another. Many of them are rationally ignorant because particular government policies might be costly to them, but they might only cost a very little amount for each individual, less than the cost of actually finding out about what these interventions are. And moreover, many individuals are irrationally ignorant. They entertain ludicrous notions about how politics or the economy work, because once again, the cost of entertaining such notions and voting on them is very low to them. So there is no perfect popular sovereignty. And moreover, Hardin writes that another roadblock to the will of the people controlling the government is that to be effective, government must work through institutions. But the structure and eventually the actions of institutions are substantially unintended consequences, the result of growth and not the outcome of popular choice or even any systematic choice at all. So once institutions are established, their mechanisms are established, say the three branches of government under a constitution, they begin to take a life of their own. The institutional mechanisms constrain the kinds of decisions that economic actors and political actors can make. And very often that leads to the emergence of structures that no individual would have planned or would have wanted in the first place. Say, for instance, the two-party electoral system in the United States, which is an extra-constitutional but very important organ of government. The two-party system would not have been intended by the framers. As a matter of fact, the framers would have been quite appalled at how things have turned out. They warned explicitly against the emergence of faction, for instance. Along with the two-party system came the electoral primary system, which heavily biases the results toward anybody who wins a small plurality within a given state, for instance. And different states have their primaries at different times, so say the candidates who win in Iowa and or New Hampshire will have a much higher chance of winning the nomination for the Republican Party, for instance, than other candidates who might have had a larger percentage of the vote. Another problem, another institution that grew spontaneously without anybody intending it to grow this way, is the executive branch, with its thousands of various administrative agencies, each of which has virtually autonomous power over executive, legislative, and judicial matters. So nobody ever voted on these issues. Nobody at any point in time ever gave an up or down vote on whether to have a primary system or whether to give these administrative agencies certain kinds of powers. It just happened gradually. But the will of the people has nothing to do with these kinds of institutions.